Well, thanks for joining me. I'm here with Dr. Julie Kientz and Dr. Jessica Jenness talking about a methodology called ARC. So what is ARC?
Glad you asked. So ARC stands for Asynchronous Remote Communities, and it's actually a set of methodologies and adapted methodologies from human-centered design that take kind of more traditional methods such as like focus groups or surveys or diary studies and transforms them so the participation in those methods is a lot more flexible. So it can be done asynchronously, meaning not at the same time, as well as remote, meaning not face-to-face. So this allows a lot more flexibility of participation and also has the advantage that they can be done over a longer period of time. If you do something more traditional like a focus group, you may only have 1 or 2 sessions at most, and they take a lot of time to get everyone there, where with an ARC, you can actually kind of spread out the sort of similar research questions across a longer period of time.
So you guys have been working on a project recently employing this. Can you give me an example of when this is a useful project?
So the project that Julie and I are working on stemmed from, first, I guess on my side of it, I work with a population of depressed teens in my clinical work and research. And one of the problems we have in that area is I work with depressed teens, and we know that about 3 million teens per year are diagnosed with depression, and that about 20% of teens get diagnosed with depression by the time they reach young adulthood, which is a huge public health problem. We also noticed that more than half of these teens actually don't get into care, and when they do get into care, engagement's pretty low, so they only come to maybe a handful of sessions. So we were trying to, or I was trying to address the problem of how can we actually increase reach of depression treatments, especially evidence-based treatments. And I had been working with Julie a little bit previously on a project related to ARC. And we kind of came together when we saw this call for the ALACRITY Center grants and thought, hey, maybe we can use ARC as a way to potentially deliver evidence-based care to teens, as a way to increase the reach of the treatment, as well as potentially increase engagement, given the fact that technology is kind of this ubiquitous thing in teens' lives at this point. So perhaps we can leverage that in order to increase reach and scope and engagement in depression treatment for teens.
And I would add that I think that with a teenage population that's also at risk for depression or has mild and moderate depression, that added piece of flexibility is really important. Yeah. So allowing them to participate in a more lightweight, flexible manner, schedule into the time that they have, can be really helpful for allowing these teens to participate in the research.
Who do you think it would not be a good technique to use, or what attributes wouldn't it work with?
So I would say that ARC may not be a great method to deliver treatment for teens with severe depression or teens with at high risk for things like suicidality or self-harm, just because there's not this in-person touch tone. So I would say that may be one area that we felt less sure about. So that's why we started more with mild to moderate depression at this point, with the idea that perhaps when a teen goes in to get, say, a child check on a yearly basis, their provider sees that they are a little elevated on depression. Enrolling them into some kind of technology-based depression treatment could be a nice first step to see, do they respond to this kind of care? And if so, great. And if not, then maybe that would be an indicator that they should get referrals to more specialized care, like in an outpatient treatment center.
Yeah, and for ARC more generally, I would also think about, if you wanted to think about beyond teens and mental health, you might think about populations who are maybe have limited technology proficiency would probably not be good candidates for this. I would say that candidates who are working on maybe some more sensitive topics that they may not want to disclose on a technology format might also not be a necessarily good candidate for that as well.
What did you find to be the benefits now that you've put it to test?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the benefits of using an ARC are thinking about this flexible participation and this participation over time, I think, are the 2 biggest wins here. The flexible participation is great for the participants because, again, they can kind of check in with us when they need to. We can send out reminders if needed. We design each of the sort of activities on a weekly basis to be about 20 minutes long, so they can kind of fit them in on their own time and work it into their schedule. The benefit for the research is really this overtime piece, right? Because teens in our study have time to reflect on these things, as well as we're doing this with clinicians as well. So teens and clinicians in our study participating in ARC really are able to sort of think about this project longer term. There's time between sessions that they may come back to it. There may be things that happen in their week that might impact their response the next week. So this overtime piece seems really critical, and that's something that's missing from a lot of traditional user-centered design methods that may only have these sort of more snapshots in their life. And then I'd also say the thinking about iteration and the human-centered design process, because we have time each week to think about our next step, we're able to build upon each step. So we might do an activity in weeks 1 or 2, and then we might have a later one that builds upon what we learned from those previous ones.
I would also say, just specifically about our project, we've started first with trying to understand what would be the needs of clinicians and teens who might use this kind of technology to treat depression. And so in that process, we've really learned that in-person contact, at least some, is important to teens and clinicians, which we were, I think, a little surprised by on the teen side in particular, that they really wanted that. And so we've started to now shape our thinking in this next step of design, the design step of our project, that we may be focused more on using it as an in-between tool to support in-person sessions.
Julie, can you talk a little bit more about what an ARC looks like?
Yeah, so how an ARC works is that you recruit a community. So the C of ARC stands for communities, and so you recruit a community of people who you're trying to understand and engage in a design process. So how an ARC works is you use an online platform. We use the Slack chatting platform, but other researchers have used things like Facebook private groups or other online systems like Discord or other online tools to bring these communities together and have these activities that happen over a period of time. For our particular ARC, we've recruited about 10 participants in a community for about a 10-week period, and we have weekly activities from each week. And so on the first week, it might be a little bit of an icebreaker activity where they get to know each other. They might have some general questions to answer about the topic that we're studying. Later weeks, we might have surveys or polls that we might do. Other weeks, we might have them do sketches and take a photo of their sketch and upload it onto the site. Future weeks, we might have interactive discussions via direct message where they might interview each other and then report back to us. We've also done some things like presenting some design ideas to them through the forms of prototypes and screenshots, have them try them out and then report back to us. So it's really flexible in terms of the things that we do. We really try to have these weekly activities be about 20 minutes long and have that participation happen for at least 10 weeks, although we're finding sometimes going longer can be helpful too.
How should somebody interested in using ARC pick the right social platform for them?
Yeah, so when you think about what platform you might want to use for an ARC, there's some pros and cons to each. Because we were working with youth and many teens are under the age of 18, we really did want to have some anonymous participation and allowing teens to be able to have their anonymity be protected. We also thought maybe due to the sensitive nature of the topic of thinking about depression that anonymity would be important as well. Other researchers have actually found like the Facebook platform to be helpful because you're actually seeing a real person and you might see their face, and that's actually can increase the feelings of community amongst the people there. They might be able to see a little bit more about who's in the group. So anonymity has its pros and cons depending on the population that you're studying.
Additionally, I would imagine that people who are already on Facebook and familiar with that platform, some people might be more comfortable using it because of that.
Yes, and we definitely encountered that with the clinician side of our ARC, that they were not as familiar with Slack as a platform, which caused some confusion. And you just may want to consider that when you're deciding who to use which platform with, and potentially even more hands-on orientation to the platform, for example. And one thing that we've really had to think a lot about in regards to our specific project that is involving a clinical population and treatment for depression is this idea of privacy and HIPAA compliance. So you may need to consider that as well, depending on what you want to input into ARC.
Yeah, and one more consideration from a research perspective might also be access to the data that's generated from this ARC. So platforms like Facebook don't give you much control over how you pull the information out of there. It's very cumbersome to kind of go through the history of the group and kind of pull out each of those things. Slack is really nice because you can actually just download the data into a highly usable format. It's much more easier to kind of go back and see the whole log of everything that's happened. There's also even some analytic tools built into the platform itself that we can look about, like, which participants were the most active, which ones were communicating with each other. So we can actually get some more analytics behind the scenes with using the Slack platform.
Why don't you now walk us through Slack?
Better. Okay. So this is the Slack application. There's a number of features that are sort of built into the tool that we've taken advantage of. So you can have different servers that include kind of different groups of people. And within those servers, you can have different chats, and you can do things that are kind of group chats, as well as things like direct messages. And so we have two different channels. One is for our clinicians and one is for our teens. We have a group just for our researchers. So this is where we kind of coordinate on things around, coordinating how we're doing the ARC, what we're going to do in our meetings next week. We also have the ARC itself. And so each of our participants were invited to join the channel, and they can choose their own kind of screen name, is what you might call it. Some of them kind of chose fun names, some just Eeyore, Blue Coyote, Scooby. So they kind of gave themselves names, and they introduced themselves. And we can kind of scroll back to the very beginning of our ARC. Here we have our undergraduate research assistant, Ria, who's been really wonderful, is posting these weekly activities. And so we'll, okay, here's the activity for the week. She can set that topic, and she'll have kind of the activities. And so here we're talking about a vote that we did. So we used a built-in tool in Slack called Simple Poll. We had them answer a question, and we can kind of see which participants voted for which of the different options. We've also done things where we've embedded videos. So here's a video on behavioral activation, which is the evidence-based tool that we're integrating into this research. And so we had them watch a short video to get them up to speed on what behavioral activation was, and they could give feedback on that as well. So you can see that Wildcat here is responding. There's also things like reactions, so you can kind of indicate that you've read or agree with their post. You can actually add all sorts of fun emojis if you really want to. We've also experimented with some fun things like using animated GIFs. So there's a tool within here where people can just post a fun GIF as a way of kind of explaining those things too. Slack also allows for things like threaded conversations. You can see here this participant Lemon had responded, and a couple people had responded to them to kind of help clarify sort of that response, and they were able to kind of build off of each other's discussions. So you can have some different discussions there. So this is kind of the clinicians group. We also had the teen group on a different channel. We uploaded some different prototypes of what we think things like chatbots that are also a feature of Slack might be able to do to kind of deliver different components of the behavioral activation treatment. So we uploaded images for them to take a look at and give us feedback on whether or not they thought that this would work for them, what they thought would be improved by this particular tool.
I will say that working in a multidisciplinary setting with Julie has been really exciting for me personally. Julie just and her team brings such creative thinking and innovative thinking to problems of mental health, which are important to us, and has an expertise in these methods that I've never heard of until meeting Julie and her team. So for me, it's been very exciting, and I do think it will really lead to innovations in mental health in a way that if I had just been siloed in my own little psychology building, I would not have really gotten to that place. So.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree. I mean, my expertise is more on kind of the design process and technology, and I actually don't know as much about mental health and the evidence-based program that we're working with, and I know that I can absolutely trust Jess to be super great on top of all those things. I really appreciate her expertise on that, and I think we've worked out a great relationship where we kind of know when to defer to each other's expertise, which has been really helpful. Yeah. And really, I think because this project ended up coming from both of us together, thinking about like what were we working on, what were you working on, and it really ended up being a really great collaboration where I've worked with other collaborations where like we have an idea of technologists and we sort of bring people in at sort of a superficial level, and it doesn't work nearly as well as when the project came together from both of us, really coming together with the different strengths that we bring.